My Lords, I rise to support the amendments in the name of the Noble Lord Coker to remove clauses 57, 58 and 62 from this bill, to which I've added my name. I too send my congratulations to the noble lady on her appointment, giving thanks for all the work she does, even when we don't always, across these benches, entirely agree. Clauses 57 and 58 have, as we've heard, make it appreciably more difficult to be recognised as victims of modern slavery and receive support. And at committee stage, the noble Lord the Minister responded to my concerns on these clauses by saying that far from deterring victims, this will encourage genuine victims to come forward. I query how that can be the case. Though more referrals are being made, and we know about that, I'm grateful for the statistics from Lord Coker, my noble friend the Lord Coker, but we know that's only a very small fraction of the likely number of victims to come forward and be identified. The Global Slavery Index 2018 estimated there could be as many as 136,000 victims in the UK at the moment. I cannot therefore fathom how raising the burden of evidence and making it harder to get a reasonable grounds decision can possibly do anything other than further put people off, further delay the already lengthy backlog in making conclusive grounds decisions, and end up excluding some genuine victims from support. So could I ask the Minister, after hearing some evidence earlier on, what evidence and what planning suggests that these measures will make genuine victims more likely to come forward? And could they share that evidence with us, as it seems markedly at odds with the evidence presented by the frontline agencies? Second, the noble Lord the Minister, in responding at committee stage, argued that these clauses were necessary to prevent misuse of the migration system, and we've heard some of that already, the suggestions of some of that. Could ministers share that evidence, as it seems markedly at odds with the evidence again being presented to us by agencies? And I find it a troubling approach, cutting across support from genuine victims. We already have a system which requires an assessment of potential victims, and it is capable of identifying fraudulent or inappropriate claims, and I believe does so. Given this, it is not clear to me that the government has produced an adequate rationale for this reform. Finally, and briefly, on Clause 62, I have heard the reassurances of the Minister, but I remain unclear and uncomfortable with what could or would be classified as acting in bad faith, and where the line is to be drawn on serious or minor criminality. I remain concerned that Clause 62 is a gift to those who force victims into illegal activity to entrap them. I've heard the Minister promise that future modern slavery legislation is a priority. As the Bishop with lead responsibility for modern slavery, I truly welcome this and look forward to engaging over that legislation when it arrives. So I'm not entirely clear what this legislation is going to address, and I echo a comment from the noble Lord Alton at committee stage that if future positive legislation is in the pipeline, why we are being asked to push through Part 5, as others are saying, as part of this bill, as an add-on, which otherwise focuses overwhelmingly on the asylum seekers, of the asylum system. For all those reasons, I remain of the view that these clauses would best be removed from this bill, and the government would do better to return with a new bill which focuses squarely on modern slavery. My Lords, I rise to speak to Amendment 70A in my name, and I'm very grateful to the noble Baronesses Lady Lister and Lady Hamway for their support, and to Callian for their briefings and their assistance. We debated this amendment at committee stage, but we're bringing it back because the government's response seemed a little unclear on the situation as it is occurring on the ground, and we might push them a little further to take overdue action. I'd be interested to hear if there is any progress tonight. The situation faced by overseas domestic workers is a historic wrong which has been allowed to continue for a decade, despite consistent evidence from the sector on what is happening. We need to reiterate from the start that this amendment is only looking to restore the previous status quo from before 2012. We know from the data collected by Kalyan that since then, reported levels of abuse by domestic workers, or of domestic workers, has increased significantly. We also know that the government recognised this is a legitimate problem, which is why new measures were introduced in 2016, referenced by the Noble Lady, the Minister, at committee stage. These included allowing domestic workers to change employer, but not to extend their visa, except in the cases of those officially recognised as victim of people trafficking or modern slavery. The fact that these measures were felt necessary in 2016 is evidence that the government concedes that the abuse and exploitation is real and needs confronting. Sadly, the evidence of the last 6 years from Kalyan shows that while the problem is real, the 2016 solution has not really succeeded in helping at all. Indeed, Kalyan's evidence shows that abuse and exploitation have continued at exactly the same way as before. For many of the workers in question, the inability to extend their visas when they change employer in practice leaves them trapped. For workers with only a relatively short time remaining on their visa, weeks or a few months, their visa status makes them unattractive potential employees, and so, in practice, makes leaving their abusive employer the only option on paper. The government, including the Noble Minister at committee stage, has also urged that exploited workers are best dealt with through referral to the NRM. However, the problem here is that many of the workers in question, while they may have a case under employment law, often do not meet the criteria of victims of modern slavery. They are, however, by virtue of their status, at risk of falling into slavery or other forms of exploitation and abuse, precisely because it is difficult for them to change job or receive support, and because many are simply unaware of their rights or in possession of their passport or their visa. This amendment is really about prevention rather than cure. By restoring the previous ability of domestic workers to change employer and extend their visa, we would empower them to report abuse, confident in their ability to attract alternative employment. Instead of waiting for them to become victims of slavery, we would be providing them with their own productive agency to escape their situation and report their exploiters. In the context of this bill, this is a very modest amendment, which would make little difference to the overall migration picture in the UK, but would make a vast difference to the lives of those who are impacted. We have 10 years of data and evidence now built up on this issue, and I hope that we might be able to right this historic wrong. I beg to move. My Lords, having listened to the debates, and I'm very grateful for the contribution of many of the noble lords who have spoken and engaged with this, and engaged carefully and over time, I do have to say I'm disappointed that we don't seem to have made much progress, and I would have wanted to have heard much more, not just about the agenda of the meeting tomorrow, but also of the possibility of future legislation and where this clause might fit within it. That concerns me deeply, that there hasn't been any obvious detail about that for the future. However, mindful of the time and the great number of issues that everyone has before them tonight and in the future, I do very reluctantly withdraw the amendment at this time.
Is it your Lordship's pleasure this amendment be withdrawn?
The amendment is by leave withdrawn. Before clause 69,
Right Honourable Baroness Williams of Trafford.